This video was brought to you by Nebula. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party have been in power almost continuously since its inception in 1955, having only been out of power for a handful of years from 1993 to 1994 and 2009 to 2012. But the party looks to be in an increasingly difficult position. As a party that just lost 3 by-elections in one day, has a deeply unpopular prime minister, is slipping in the polls, and is still reeling from a major scandal while facing a weak economy. So, as we'll answer in this video, why are things going so badly for the LDP? Is Japan really gearing up to boot out its long-dominant conservative government? And could the fragmented opposition really break up the LDP's dominance? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start by taking a look at the LDP's recent by-election losses. There were 3 by-elections to Japan's House of Representatives on April 28th, one in Nagasaki, one in Tokyo, and one in Shimane, all 3 having been former LDP seats. Now, the first 2 were triggered following the resignation of 2 LDP lawmakers implicated in the major slush fund scandal that we'll come to later. Given this context, the LDP decided not to field candidates in these 2 seats, and as such, they were won by the main opposition Constitutional Democratic Party, or CDP. Instead, the LDP decided to go all in on the Shimane by-election, triggered by the death of a senior LDP lawmaker, but they also lost there pretty heavily to the CDP. Now, this is a big deal because Shimane is known as a conservative stronghold, and the seat has been held by the LDP since the current electoral system was implemented in 1996, making the loss all the more damaging for the LDP. And to be honest, these 3 losses are just the latest in a series of setbacks for Japan's LDP government, led by Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The LDP's popularity had already been dented following the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in mid-2022, an event which shined a spotlight on the political influence of the Unification Church on the LDP. Then, since November last year, the LDP has been mired in a slush fund scandal that has even further damaged the party. To briefly sum up the scandal, leading LDP party factions had for some time been failing to report hundreds of millions of yen's worth of party funds, and instead put the money into slush funds used to give financial kickbacks to lawmakers. Now, several factions, including the largest, the Abe faction, were implicated, and the scandal hasn't gone away since, as it's forced the dissolution of several factions, the resignation or sacking of several cabinet members, high-profile ethics hearings, and the criminal indictment of several LDP lawmakers. This scandal, set against the backdrop of a troubled economy, which we recently made a video about, has unsurprisingly been bad news for Kishida, who vowed to deliver political reform and rebuild trust with voters. In fact, in one recent poll, 80% of respondents said that they disapproved of Kishida's handling of the scandal, while only 13% indicated approval. At the same time, overall approval for his government, according to most polls, sits at the mid-20s, while disapproval sits close to 70%. The LDP itself has slid considerably in party identification polls too, falling from about 35% at the beginning of 2023 to averaging 25% now. Meanwhile, the proportion of voters saying that they don't identify with any particular party has increased to more than 40%. So that raises the big question. Could the LDP really fall from power, giving Japan a non-LDP government for only the 3rd time in almost 70 years? To answer that question, we need to talk about Japan's opposition parties, which have long struggled to break the LDP's dominance. As you can see from the party identification polling graph, there are quite a few opposition parties, none of which come particularly close to the LDP even after its decline in the polls, though it's the centre-left CDP that tops the opposition pack. Now, if the CDP is to lead the next government, it will have to overcome a number of challenges. The main one being winning over those voters, now the largest group, who identify as independent or non-affiliated. And there are a number of signs that the CDP is actually doing well in this regard, as exit polls from the recent by-elections show that it was the CDP who won the most support from independent voters in all 3 seats. Now, it's early days, but party identification poll numbers are also ticking up for the CDP, with the party recently surpassing 10%, while the proportion of those identifying as independent or non-affiliated has dropped somewhat. Perhaps more worrying for the LDP, though, is that recent polling suggests that more than 50% not only expect a change in government, but want a change in government come the next election. But that's not the only issue. Another challenge facing the opposition parties is that there's a lot of them. And per Japan's electoral system, just over 60% of the seats in the House of Representatives are single-member districts that use first past the post. Meaning that the ruling LDP benefits from the fact that the anti-government vote is split across multiple parties fighting for any given seat. Back in 2009, when the LDP were defeated in a historic election, opposition vote splitting wasn't as much of an issue, as the then Democratic Party of Japan was viewed as the only viable opposition party. But things are different now. There are 3 opposition parties currently with double-digit seats, the largest being the CDP, then the broadly right-wing Nippon Ishin no Kai, and finally the Japanese Communist Party. So if the opposition do want to unseat the LDP, then one potential path to victory is to come up with some sort of electoral agreement. Not necessarily an alliance or a coalition, but perhaps just a deal that will see the opposition parties agree to stand or not stand candidates in certain seats to concentrate anti-government votes on single opposition candidates. Now, this kind of deal played a role back in 2009 too, as the Japanese Communist Party voluntarily withdrew its candidates from about half of the districts, contributing to the historic opposition victory. But crafting some sort of agreement this time round is easier said than done. For starters, relations between the CDP and Nippon Ishin are, to put things simply, not good, with Nippon Ishin maintaining its own goal of becoming the largest opposition party and showing hostility towards the CDP. So an agreement between the two looks unlikely. And secondly, potential cooperation with the Communist Party is tricky for the CDP too, as it could alienate conservative-leaning rural voters that the CDP is seeking to bring on side. Ultimately, it's too soon to say with any certainty what will happen at the next election, particularly as the government has until the end of October 2025 to hold it, and opposition demands for an early election have so far been rejected. But the reality is that while the chances may be relatively slim, the LDP hasn't looked this close to losing power since, well, the last time they lost power. Despite this, the opposition parties still have a significant uphill battle ahead, and even if some kind of opposition CDP-led government does come into power, they'll have to work hard to avoid history repeating itself, as the last non-LDP government, elected in 2009, lasted just 3 years before the LDP returned to power on the back of a landslide election victory. There's definitely going to be new developments with this story though, so keep an eye out for future changes. Actually, the best way to stay on top of the news is with Nebula News. If you haven't heard, we've just launched a project alongside our partners at Nebula called Nebula News, where every day the TLDR team curates a selection of videos that matter the most in the world right now. As you surely already know, Nebula is the thoughtful streaming service that's pushing boundaries on what independent creators can do with their content, including Nebula News, where we handpick a feed of content that should help you keep up to date with everything you need to sound smart and be truly informed. We believe that in a confusing and overwhelming news environment, knowing what to pay attention to is important. You can't track every story, so our curation should help to surface what really matters, showing you videos from TLDR and other superb creators that will help you understand the world around you quickly and easily. It's not just the curated news content brought to you directly by us. Nebula also features loads of exclusive original content. That's things like Real Life Law's brand new series War Room, which every month runs you through a whole load of ongoing conflicts to keep you in the loop. You can also watch every TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in many instances, before they land on YouTube. Now, if you're already subscribed to Nebula, then you can find the brand new Nebula news section at nebula.tv/news. And make sure to bookmark or save that link so that you can use it as your TLDR-ified news homepage. If you're not a member already, you can click the link in the description to sign up now. If you do, you'll get 40% off an annual plan by using our link. That's less than £2 a month. Plus, Nebula will know that you came from us, which really helps us out.